Welcome to the last lecture of the BIO104 series, Conservation Biology. Biodiversity hotspots only account for less than 1.5% of the land. However, if you consider how much they contribute to the global biodiversity, they actually contribute nearly one-third of all the species found on Earth. A major conservation hurdle is identifying where these hotspots occur. This will lead to the focusing of conservation efforts, thus maximizing the conservation of these areas. However, identifying these areas usually places more emphasis on vertebrate and plant species. Thus, the conservation of invertebrates and microbes is not as much represented in these biodiversity hotspots. In addition, these locations may change over time or may be altered by climate change. Thus, it is important to not only identify these locations, but to constantly monitor and protect them. Nature reserves must be managed properly. Though disturbance is originally thought to be a negative process, many times this allows species to coexist. It is very important within these reserves to maintain balance in the ecosystem. That means that it is important to understand what is unique to each system. For instance, burning is considered an important disturbance for many grassland habitats. This allows for many of the plant species to coexist in the tallgrass prairies. Successful management of these ecosystems involves periodic controlled burns in order to maintain the species diversity that is present. When implementing a conservation plan, it is also important to consider the reserve size. It is currently debated whether or not few large reserves or many small reserves provide better modes of conservation. In general, larger reserves are easier to manage, have less edge effects, and can support many habitats. In addition, many large species of herbivores as well as predators need larger habitats in order to sustain themselves. However, small reserves may preserve unique habitats. They can also act to slow the spread of diseases and may sustain populations over a larger landscape. Now that we know more about minimum and effective population size, conservation biologists have now recognized that many of our national parks and reserves are much too small to support the long-term survival of many different species. Zone reserves contain vast areas of undisturbed habitat. However, these zone reserves also try to manage human use of the land while preserving its integrity. Surrounding zones to the protected land acts as buffers to protect the natural areas. Costa Rica, for example, is primarily zoned into 11 different conservation areas. This stemmed from an agreement that lowered their national debt. These buffer zones provide many forest products, water, power, and as well as supporting ecological sustainable tourism and agricultural industries. However, in 2003, some of these buffer zones were overharvested, threatening the core areas. Though Costa Rica has made many strides in protecting their biodiversity, there is still much work to be done in order to ensure that overharvesting does not occur. Though many of the zone reserves are present in terrestrial habitats, aquatic ecosystems are also threatened by overexploitation. More recent conservation plans involve establishing marine zones strategically around the world. These zones are restricted from fishing in order to increase fish populations for harvesting in the nearby areas. For example, Florida is now the home to 13 marine sanctuaries that are restricted from fishing. Overall, this has led to larger and more abundant fish in the surrounding areas, while also providing habitat for recreational divers, thus increasing the economic potential for these zoned reserves. Urban ecology is the field of study that involves studying the interactions between organisms and their environments in urban settings, such as New York. As cities expand and populations grow, the urban landscape is continuously spreading into the surrounding regions and habitats. In general, urban streams have higher levels of nutrients, contaminants, and will drain into the surrounding regions, thus having a very notable impact on the surrounding landscape. Understanding the ecology, quality, and flow of urban streams can help minimize this impact on the surrounding areas that result from urban spread. Urban ecology can also aid in preserving species within urbanized habitats. There are many different ways that human activity can affect ecosystems. One of these ways involves the enrichment of nutrients within the environment. Human activity usually removes nutrients from one region and adds them to another. In farming, for instance, the food that is grown in the soil will sequester nutrients that are then delivered elsewhere, such as supermarkets, cities, etc. Soil nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus that are then removed by the food when it's harvested need to then be replaced by fertilizers. In addition, the use of fossil fuels releases nitrous oxide into the atmosphere. This can then return to ecosystems as nitrate in rainwater, which can then be fixed by nitrogen-fixing symbionts. Ecosystems in general have a critical load, which acts as a threshold for nutrient levels. When these nutrients rise above these threshold levels, the integrity of the ecosystem will be compromised. This is illustrated by examining the dead zone, which is formed in the Mississippi Basin from excess nitrogen that occurs from nitrogen runoff. Humans also produce many toxins that are then released into the surrounding environment. These also may be absorbed by organisms. Many of these compounds undergo what is termed biological magnification. This means that these toxic substances will accumulate in the higher trophic levels. This means that top predators tend to be the most effective. These toxins include industrial compounds and pesticides, pharmaceuticals, drugs, as well as plastic waste. Rising carbon dioxide levels as a result of human activity can also lead to the greenhouse effect. Greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, and water vapor can allow for the trapping of infrared radiation from the sun. This will then be trapped close to the atmosphere, thus warming the surface of the Earth. This, combined with changes in wind and ocean currents, can drastically alter the climate. It is important to understand that the effects of climate change are multi-level, meaning they can have cellular, individual, population, and ecosystem effects. In general, warming or changes in temperature can alter rates of DNA synthesis, repair, cell division, and other enzymatic reactions. An example of this is given below. Resin is typically produced in infected trees. This is used as a defense mechanism. However, the production of resin tends to decrease with drought as well as rising temperatures. In addition, warmer temperatures have shortened the developmental time for the pine beetle. This has a twofold effect, leading to devastating landscape effects where the mountain pine beetles appear. Climate change can also affect individuals. Warming temperatures can increase the risk of overheating, can reduce food intake, and may alter reproductive cycles or reproductive success. The American pika, for instance, in warmer temperatures will spend more time in the burrows in order to escape the heat. This means that it will have less time foraging for food, thus having significant effects on the overall fitness of those individuals. Most pika extinctions occur at sites that are experiencing higher summer temperatures as well as smaller areas of habitat. Climate change can also affect populations. Although some populations have been able to adapt and increase as a result of climate change, this is not the case for all populations. Overall, there is a negative effect due to rapid climate change. An example of that is looking at caribou populations. Caribou typically migrate north in the spring in order to have a food supply for their young. However, by changing temperatures, the flowering plant, which is usually their main food source, tends to bloom earlier than normal. As a result, the caribou have not been able to adapt to this change effectively, and thus they are missing their major food supply, which has a major impact on their population size. Climate change can also have large-scale ecosystem effects. Climate change can alter primary production levels, nutrient cycling, and can also cause changes in species distributions. The sea urchin, for example, requires temperatures above 12 degrees centigrade in order to reproduce successfully. Warming of the ocean waters have enabled this species to expand its range to the south. However, as the sea urchin expands its range, it will destroy high-diversity kelp communities, leaving urchin barrens in its wake, thus dramatically affecting the ecosystems that were typically present in these areas. Many models have been developed to explain and predict climate change. Current models predict that if carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases production rates continue at the current rate, the Earth's temperature will increase an additional 3 degrees centigrade by the end of the 21st century. Though there are natural processes like volcanic eruptions that contribute to greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, This alone does not cause the drastic temperature increase that we are seeing. Much of this increase is the result of human activities. Human activity has also been known to cause changes in the atmospheric composition. Ozone is a protective layer that helps to protect the Earth from harmful UV radiation. This protective layer has become damaged due to the accumulation of chlorofluorocarbons in the atmosphere. The presence of CFCs will reduce the ozone O3 to oxygen O2. However, due to the implementation of regulations, CFC levels have decreased over the last 20 years. As a result, the ozone is starting to repair itself, as we can see in the diagram to the lower right. In regions where the ozone layer is thinning, more UV radiation is allowed to penetrate through, causing DNA damage to primary producers. Phytoplankton in the Antarctic Ocean that reside under this ozone hole have been studied and have been noted to have reduced growth as well as higher rates of DNA damage. As humans, we have an obligation to protect our species and to improve the overall quality of life for the humans that are on Earth as well as for future generations. Sustainable development seeks to meet the needs of human needs without limiting the ability of the Earth to support future generations. In Costa Rica, conservation and restoration plans for ecosystems has improved the overall quality of life, decreasing the birth and death rates, increasing life expectancy, and also increasing literacy rates. Thus, sustainable development has multiple benefits to ecosystems as well as the populations they support.